Introduction. Disasters rarely announce themselves. They build in whispers: the sudden fracture of Arctic ice, shifts in high-altitude jet streams, and a dip in Atlantic currents small enough to ignore, too far away to matter. But sometimes, those whispers merge into a roar that stretches across oceans, binding nations together not in triumph but in catastrophe. In the winter of 2026, meteorologists began to see patterns that didn't belong. Temperature drops sharper than any charts could justify. Fronts colliding with uncharacteristic violence. And a pressure system forming off Hudson Bay that no model could fully explain. The warnings were dismissed as outliers, exaggerations of computers pushed too hard by theoretical conditions. Storms have always come and gone, they said. The world has weathered worse. But this storm was different. It didn't surge in one place, nor strike one nation. Instead, it unfurled like a colossal web across the northern hemisphere, pulling threads of cold into an ever-tightening fist. First, Canada's eastern provinces vanished under sheets of ice so heavy power pylons snapped like matchsticks. Hours later, the northeastern United States plunged into darkness as sub-zero winds howled through toppled grids and buried substations. By midnight, even across the Atlantic, Britain's fragile infrastructure crumbled under snowfalls unseen in centuries. The world expected chaos. What no one expected was silence. Digital silence. The global coordination centers, satellite relays, and transcontinental cables that make up the interconnected power systems all went dark simultaneously. Not a rolling blackout. Not a temporary outage. A complete severing of the arteries that pulsed electricity into the first world. In that silence, cities turned into ice traps, streets into graveyards, homes into prisons of coal. 3 nations, bound by history, commerce, and surveillance, now shared a singular fate: survival in a world that had reverted to pre-electric fragility overnight. This is not a story of technology failing. It is a story of humanity, stripped naked in the storm. Governments scrambling to hold power without literal power. Families fracturing in frozen rooms. Borders closed as desperation spilled outward. Survival is recast not as a luxury, but as a gamble against time and temperature. For in the frozen blackout, mercy no longer existed. And the storm was not finished yet. Prologue. The jet hadn't been late. That was the first sign something was wrong. At 32,000 feet, Captain Raymond Ellis guided his transatlantic flight out of the western edge of a swirling weather system no satellite feed had fully captured. On the navigation monitors, the storm looked like a cracked iris spreading outward across half a continent, spinning against its own maps. The radar blipped with confused interference, like something living, searching. Ellis adjusted the throttle, lips taut. His co-pilot muttered a curse under his breath. A line of green, red, and bright white was clawing across the screen, tightening into an unnatural spiral that stretched farther than the eye could read. "We'll report it in," Ellis said finally, though both knew there were already dozens of such reports flooding air traffic control. Controllers in New York, Toronto, and Boston were sketching the same picture with scribbled voices. Storm cells fusing like magnets, behaving less like weather and more like war. Below them, the Atlantic was black. Not evening dark, but dead dark waves flattened by the sheer violence of air above them. Ellis couldn't help but think it felt like flying over a lung that had stopped breathing. In Montreal, Clara Desjardins scraped frost off her apartment window even though the clock still hadn't struck noon. The cold didn't feel seasonal, didn't feel earnestly Canadian, it felt injected, artificial, and sudden. Her thermometer, hanging uselessly against the window pane, showed -20 Celsius. Not a wind chill, an actual reading. She tapped it twice, waiting for the mercury to shift. Her phone buzzed. A warning. Environment Canada, severe Arctic outflow winds. Stay indoors. Power grid stress is possible. Store water. She swallowed. She'd seen countless winter warnings before. This one was phrased differently. Not could affect. Not severe weather possible. This was an order. Like someone in Ottawa had stopped writing reports and started calling for prayer. She went to twist on the stove just to calm herself, needing the blue hiss of gas as much as the heat. Nothing came. She turned the knob again, harder. Nothing. It wasn't until she flicked the light switch that she realized her entire building had quietly gone black. Then, as if on cue, across the street an entire block winked out. The hospital sign 2 avenues away flickered once, then surrendered to pitch. The city's hum, the constant electrical heartbeat one never noticed until it was gone, died in that breath. Montreal was silent. Frozen silent. At the Federal Energy Response Center in Washington, D.C., walls of screens normally cascaded with green lights, the healthy veins of a living system. Tonight they had turned red. "Explain it," demanded Secretary Ilana Perez, slamming her palm against the map table, her voice as clipped as her posture. "Ma'am, it's not just us," said a technician, sweat collecting around his headset. "Canada's losing full eastern load. Their grid dominoed from Ontario down to the Maritimes. And the UK just reported cascading substation failure. Their east coast went dark 10 minutes ago. Liverpool, Manchester, Glasgow, etc. What about cyber attack?" Perez's voice cut through the clamor. The technician swallowed. "If this is cyber, it's beyond anything we've ever classified. Simultaneous, transatlantic, synchronized." However, he paused and looked at his board. No intrusion points. No digital signatures. The infrastructure is just freezing itself dead. The room went so quiet the air vents could be heard wheezing. Then another light turned red. New England. Massachusetts down to Connecticut. Entire corridors of American civilization are blinking off as if unseen fingers were plucking them from existence. Perez steadied herself against the console. Her father used to tell her that the Cold War never really ended, it just thawed waiting. Now she wondered if the old ghost hadn't been thawing at all, but preparing to refreeze. In Birmingham, England, the storm announced itself with glass. Windows burst inward as air pressure plummeted. Families screamed, covering children with blankets, as snow poured directly into their kitchens and hallways. Outside, lampposts bent and snapped, each breaking accompanied by a sharp metallic shriek that carried eerily across the rooftops. Londoners had always believed the city immune to bombs, to wars, to tides. But as their buses slid sideways into railings and the underground stopped mid-tunnel, even faith stumbled. Smartphones drained to dead faster than they should. Car ignitions gave nothing but a cough. The city's arteries constricted, and an empire that once ruled the seas found itself drowning in snow. In Calgary, first responders tried triage by instinct. Engines struggled, their diesel as stiff as glue from temperatures dropping 20 degrees in an hour. Radios croaked and died. Men and women who'd memorized trauma drills found themselves trapped under their own failing lungs, their breath frosting inside their masks. Patients went stiff before they could be loaded into rigs. Siren lights spun uselessly against the white curtain dropping from the heavens. By 9 p.m., half the province was unreachable. The highways disappeared into snowdrifts taller than pickup trucks. Houses creaked as timber groaned under ice. The prairie whispered with the sound of cracking wood, glass, and bone. And across the northern plains, wolves howled. Captain Ellis's plane descended into JFK with a belly full of fuel and nothing else working properly. Airport beacons had gone. The airstrip lights were dead. Inside the cabin, passengers wept as the plane landed blind, guided only by backup mechanicals and the instinct of a man who had thousands of hours strapped to his seat. The wheels screamed against a frozen runway. When the deplaning door opened, no officials greeted them. No buses arrived. The terminal stood dark, cavernous, and abandoned save for stranded crowds huddled in coats, lighting the dark with desperate pocket torches. Ellis looked up once more. The sky was still swirling, a devil's pupil widening. His radio picked up only static, and beneath that, inhuman moans of interference like a machine speaking a language not meant for human ears. "What the hell is happening?" his co-pilot whispered. Ellis didn't answer. Because storms didn't growl. But above New York, this one seemed to. He could almost swear it was alive. By morning, the headlines would vanish because there were no more headlines. The BBC feed would blink off mid-sentence. CNN would spin a muted anchor until the screen fell black. Only static snow, simulating the actual snow outside their offices, would be displayed on CBC Ottawa's screen. 3 nations. Bound in lightning. Drowned in ice. Brought to their knees by silence. No one knew then what would follow. The governments collapsing under frostbite politics, the mass migration southward, the violence in grocery aisles where canned beans became more valuable than bars of gold, and the whispered rumors of Arctic caves opening. At that moment, all anyone knew was this. Light was gone. Heat was gone. Voices were gone. And the storm wasn't finished yet. Chapter 1: The Hour the Lights Died. Clara Desjardins had always believed cities had a pulse. She felt it in the faint hum of transformers 3 blocks from her Montreal apartment, in the dull vibration that threaded through pipes and wires whenever she leaned against the wall. Even in winter when snow bowed down the trees and the St. Lawrence froze solid, the city beat steady, alive with traffic lights, infuriating billboards, and subway brakes squealing to their stops. The sound of order. Civilization. On that Tuesday evening, wrapped in 2 scarves and a sweater that smelled faintly of cedar closets, Clara pressed her face to the window expecting pulse and instead finding absence. Street lamps should have lit the avenue below. None did. The traffic signal at the corner normally cycled with mindless authority. Its glow was gone. 5 lanes of cars sat in confused rows, headlights bleeding into one another. Drivers leaning on horns far louder than necessary, as if noise alone might summon electricity back. Clara switched her own lights on and off twice. Nothing. She tested her phone. For a moment 4 bars lit proudly, but every app spun empty, like carnival wheels with no prize on the other end. Within minutes, the bars shrank to 0, then vanished altogether. Her building seemed to hold its breath. The faint elevator hum was silenced, and the refrigerator that usually rattled with life was now dead and still. Something primal in her chest stirred. She grabbed her coat. Cold seeped in through walls that should have been insulated against it. When she stepped into the stairwell, she heard her first scream. It came from 2 floors down, a mother calling for help, voice fractured, half hidden by concrete and an eerie echo. Clara ran out anyway, boots clattering. At the second landing, she spotted a woman kneeling on the floor with a toddler in her lap, the boy's lips already purple. "He's not breathing right," the woman gasped, pleading with wide eyes. "My inhaler's in the car, but I can't." Her words were shredded by cold. Clara crouched, hands trembling. She worked in IT support, not medicine. Her first aid training barely covered bandages and panic reassurance. But she pulled her scarf over the child's face, trying to trap some warmth as the woman fumbled a useless phone with shaking fingers. The screen was dark as stone. Somewhere above them, glass shattered. A neighbor shouted. And just like that, Clara realized this wasn't only her city's problem. This was war against heat, war against breath. In Washington, Secretary Ilana Perez was briefed for the 8th time in less than an hour. Each time the explanation grew worse. The storms destabilized mid-continental transmission, one technician explained. His voice cracked, a mixture of exhaustion and disbelief. Multiple frequency mismatches across the eastern interconnect. Transformers are popping like dominoes, literally burning out. We're watching a chain reaction collapse. How long until redundancy systems stabilize? Perez asked. The technician only stared. He knew what she didn't want to. Redundancies required functioning neighbors in the chain. But every neighbor was collapsing too. Another aide reported, the UK Prime Minister went dark 30 minutes ago. Official address was planned, but the blackout cut communication lines. London and Manchester are fully grid dead. Canadians are reporting their hospitals transitioning to fuel cells, but diesel's already gelling in sub-zero winds. They won't last more than hours. Hours. Perez repeated, her throat tight. Entire nations cannot just lose power in hours. Secretary, with respect, the aide faltered, pushing a shaking hand through his hair, they already have. Clara made it to the lobby. 100 people had already gathered there, their breath fogging into clouds as if the entire room smoked. Some clutched flashlights. Others burned candles stolen from shrines or birthday drawers. Several stared at their phones, stabbing buttons as if disbelief might bend physics. A man in a heavy parka, face hidden beneath the fur rim, barked, "City radio says nothing. Not even static. This isn't a blackout. It's something else." His words prickled through the crowd. A blackout, Clara thought, was fixable. A blackout had utility workers dispatched, had tweets from City Hall, and had a timeline. Something else was different. Something else was permanent. At that moment, the front doors blew inward. Cold exploded into the lobby hard enough to send children screaming as burning air fled their lungs. Snow blasted across the room like smoke from a ruptured pipe, chilled particles biting eyes and cheeks until people turned away. Clara shielded her face with one arm and watched helplessly as the storm itself came in to claim them. At JFK, Captain Ellis stood in disbelief. The only light in the terminal came from scattered handheld torches and phones that were already flickering toward death. Luggage carousels no longer hummed. The glow of digital boards, scrolling lists of departures, and the electrical buzz of vending machines had vanished, leaving behind an unnatural silence punctuated only by sobs. His co-pilot sank into a chair and whispered, "It's not just here, Ray. The Midwest dispatch is offline. Towers aren't even pinging each other. It's like the grid never existed." Ellis's fingers twitched toward his radio instinctively. Dead static. Still, beneath the hiss, there was something else. That same growl from the interference up in the clouds. Low. Bestial. Almost hungry. For the first time in 3 decades of flying, a chill went through his bones, not from altitude but from certainty this sky was awake. In Birmingham, an elderly woman named Elsie Harrington lit her final candle. The wax stub barely held its wick. Outside her row house, snow collapsed against the door with the weight of stone pressing wood from its hinges. Her hands shook as she dialed the old rotary phone mounted on her wall because somehow in her mind, maybe the older tech still worked, maybe the storm respected age. The dial turned, clicked and returned. No tone. Elsie sat. She held the candle close. Around her, pipes froze into silence, windows webbed with frost so thick they looked painted. She muttered a half-forgotten hymn from her girlhood as her breath crusted into the still air. "Lord, open thy mercy in this darkness." Outside, another power line snapped with a sound that resembled a gunshot. No one responded. By 11 p.m., the temperature across both Montreal and Boston had dropped below -30. In London, buses had been abandoned on bridges, their tires encased in rime. In Toronto, hospitals pulled blankets over newborn bassinets and prayed diesel generators would last longer than science said possible. And still the storm grew. The low-pressure system over Hudson Bay pulled more Arctic air down with demonic possession, feeding itself with Atlantic currents that twisted like snakes across entire hemispheres. Yet meteorologists, even those still connected through scribbled landlines, were baffled. No equation justified this fusion, and no precedent foretold it. Something new had been born. Something powerful enough to paralyze 3 nations in one synchronized shriek of silence. Clara spent the night in the lobby, huddled between strangers, trading body heat with people whose names she didn't know. At some point, the mother with the asthmatic boy began to weep silently, rocking him while his breaths came out shallow. A man with a flashlight checked for a pulse and shook his head slowly. No one spoke much afterward. And that was when Clara realized the greatest terror wasn't the storm's howl. It wasn't even the suffocating cold. It was the silence of connection. No sirens, no news broadcast, no text notifications, no lifeline. 3 nations cut off not by bombs, not by politics, but by the elimination of the simplest human tether. For centuries, humanity had built its certainty on light. Switch a button, banish the dark. And tonight, she thought grimly while watching frost crawl across the inside of the lobby windows, light had betrayed them. The world was discovering what silence was made of.
वीडियोस बनाने हैं, फिल्मोरा है ना।